Hi, I'm Deborah Henson-Conant. This is Kathleen Wiley. We are here with Jung at Harp, and we're here to talk about higher self versus lower self, or larger self versus ego self. And we call this Jung at Harp simply because we both play the harp. But we're not here to talk about harp. We're here to talk about being artists. We're here to talk about being human beings in the world. And we're here to talk about the principles that can help us do that, the principles of creativity and the principles in Kathleen's work. And Kathleen is a Jungian psychoanalyst. Did I get that right? Finally. And so I wanted to talk today about the higher self versus the lower self. And then Kathleen said that would probably be called the larger self versus the ego self. And I wanted to talk about it because I'll just explain. I was talking to my therapist, and I was talking about the fact that there are certain pieces of work that I just don't share. I can share a lot. I may seem like I'm sharing everything, but there are secret pieces and that I've just never shared with anyone or very few people. And she was saying, are you afraid that people wouldn't like them? And I said, I'm just afraid that I would be wounded. It's not about liking or not liking. I'm sharing something that is just me, purely, absolutely me, from me to me, and to get criticism there, or not straight criticism, but to get denigration or a face or something like that, would wound me in a place that I wouldn't even know how to protect myself from. And by the way, she said, so if someone said, I don't like this, I said, that's not a problem. Like if someone said, I don't like the true you, that's easy. It's like, okay, got it. But if somebody just does something sly that I don't know how to deal with. And so my therapist said to me, you need to find a way to protect yourself in another way. And I was like, well, I don't know how to do that from within me. And I realized that I would have to do it from without me in some way, which would mean that I would have to put myself over to the protection of a higher me that's not in me. And so wanted to talk to Kathleen about that and find out like what. And also, I've been asking my therapist for years, like, what is trauma? Like, what is trauma? And she was like, that is trauma. When get denigrated or the you that is you, when that happens, that is trauma. That's the thing that's difficult for people to deal with. So having shared all of that, but that gives context and I don't know, I'd rather know why people are asking about something. So Kathleen, when I said that to you, you started talking not about higher self and lower self, but larger self and ego self. And I would love to hear what you have to say about that, and especially as artists, because, well, sorry, I'm talking, but before you said, Kathleen said, that it's like you feel like you are sharing you, and that is what is being denigrated, not your work. And I said, uh-oh, she froze. Well, I'll have to speak for her. And so I said, yes, in fact, I do feel like that's me. So you froze for a while, so I just.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, carry on, and I will now stop.
Well, yeah. So there are two or three things that were coming to my mind, and so I'm going to see if I can tick them off for myself as a way to remember, and then we can talk about them. One is this idea that in the moment we're identified with, that's only one aspect of the larger self that we are. So, for instance, in a moment of wounding, because have felt denigrated or debased or devalued, or even just totally annihilated in our sense of self, that's one experience. It's not the whole of all of who we are and all of our experiences. But something becomes traumatic when that one experience exists isolated from the rest of us to be able to inform it. Because in being located in the whole of who we are, we realize there are other things also that then can come to bear, in this case, on that place of wounding. So there's this idea that we have to begin to separate out that any one experience is the whole of who we are. One experience is one experience of our ego conscious self. But there's so much more to the larger self, the totality of who we are as a soul in a body. So That's one thing we can talk about in relationship to this. The second thing is when we begin to get that perspective, then we have a way to respond to our own wounds that can heal them. And we have a way to begin to mediate any feedback coming to us from outside people that trigger our own destructive self-hating feedback, because that's what really annihilates us now. It's not what happened historically, that's what we might call the traumatic wound, but it is that there are now these internal energy states that repeatedly do it to us. It goes on unconsciously. So we have to begin to be able to bring the rest of us to bear to intervene with ourselves. And then the third thing is there is a place where when I share something that's truly of my heart and soul, that's truly me, it's me. It's it, and I am alone with it because we are all unique, and we all, I believe, I love the image of we're all um, a spark of the divine, and we're a unique spark. No two sparks are alike. We have similarities, but we're a unique spark, or we're a unique ray. So there is a place where I may offer something of my heart and soul in writing or music or movement or the words I pick that just, oh, it just, I feel it in every cell. And other people look at me like I have three heads. And there is a place where we have to be able to bear that no one else has our experience but us. And something that may so speak to us and connect us with the larger mystery, it may fall flat on somebody else.
So I think my question is, I mean, what I've basically done in my life is just not share those things.
Right.
So, and and in, as I'm getting older, I'm thinking, wow, I might never share those things. And maybe that's fine because, they're things that are meaningful to me. But on the other hand, why wouldn't I? I mean, why wouldn't I share something that, I mean, it's purely out of fear. And I noticed that, one of the thing, I mean, when I started playing the harp, I mean, I've been able to take a lot of criticism because it doesn't speak to who I think, who I am. It speaks to something that I'm doing. It speaks to some work. It speaks to something that I'm trying. I'm happy to shift it around, everything like that. And yet, when it comes to the voice that is me to me only, that's not open to criticism. It's not about this is how you could do this better because I'm not trying to craft something.
Right.
I am sharing the voice of myself to me. And I mean, I guess I'm asking, do I share my the this do I share the voice of myself to me in the world, or do I just not and go on and assume that it's going to come out little by little in the other things that I do, but not do it in the raw things, which may or may not be, better or worse, whatever. But the fact is, I'm hiding, and as I hide,
Right.
that that generates me hiding. It's experience of me hiding, and then I'm hiding in my life.
Yeah. So what I'm going to say is I think you've got to work that out with your own psyche soul. I mean, your psyche soul may not let you rest until you find a way to begin to share those things. I mean, I'm thinking about a colleague of mine who, before he was an analyst, he was a Presbyterian minister, and he's written a book. Jerry Wright is his name. He's written a book called Reimagining God, and in the introduction to the book, he says, "Now that I'm finally publishing these essays and writing, maybe my unconscious will leave me alone and let me sleep at night." You know, he was putting himself out there in a way that I'm projecting a little bit that you're talking about putting yourself out there, and
Right.
he's finally done it because he had to do it within himself, something. So I think sometimes that really is what it's about. It's about it. What's our own soul demanding of us, and can we get away with hiding? The ego, adaptive self hiding, or does the soul say, "No, you got to do this, or I am haunting you," so to speak? And the other thing I want to say about that DHC is I think there is a place where there is a resilience that is built each time that we share ourselves in that raw, authentic way. And perhaps part of it for you with these works you're talking about is beginning to find the one person you can share them with, and then perhaps a small group that you share them with, and then perhaps a larger, more intimate salon of people that are in your intimate circle that you share them with,
Mm.
so that you begin to have the experience of what it's like to share this work that really isn't about performing or entertaining or crafting something for sale, but that's just about sharing your experience of life and the mystery. And that way you can begin to bring some different feedback to that place in you that was wounded young,
Hmm.
that still is terrified of denigration and wipeout.
As you're speaking, I like that. I don't like that denigration, wipeout. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah. I was thinking of Oliver Wendell Holmes, a quote that I really love, among others, which is, "A few can touch the magic string," and what he means by magic string is fame. So a few can touch the magic string, and noisy fame is proud to win them. Alas, for those who never sing and die with all their music in them. And I and that can be of different levels. I mean, certainly nobody would say like, well, your all your music is still inside you. That's not true. But certain thing it's less about what have I shared and what haven't I shared, and it's more about what have I hidden and what have I not hidden. Because another favorite quote of mine by Jerzy Grotowski, which is, "Don't do more, hide less." So I live by these things, but I'm not living by them.
Yeah. Well, I think this is our ongoing work of, from a Jungian perspective, where we talk about individuation. And for me, what the Christian myth of incarnation is that we're all being called to what is our soul wanting us to incarnate, to live in the flesh and in the outer world experiences at this time in our life. And at the point where you and I are in our life, what our soul is wanting us to share is going to be something different than when 30 years ago. I won't say this, but 20 or 30 years ago. And probably for a lot of our viewers. And, we get caught in that there are certain ways we should do it. And in certain time periods of our life, different things are called for. And that we have to remember. It's like, what is your soul calling you to now? Because the protection that is needed is truly a sanctioning by the larger self within. I mean,
I
it,
thought you were going to say sanctuary.
well, it is a sanctuary, that place of oneness between our ego consciousness and conscious sense of who we are, and the reality that there is this much larger self, that mystery that we sometimes feel is the muse. I mean, the muse is just one arm of the great mystery, the larger soul we are. You know, yeah,
And as you're saying it, I'm thinking, oh, so there's the us that comes to us, and there's the us that we manifest. I mean, I feel like, and maybe that's the difference, because you were saying this word larger self and
right.
ego self.
Yeah,
And
the ego self is the self that we are conscious of. And the way we become conscious usually is through outer world expression. That's an outer world experience. That's one of the primary ways we begin to experience consciousness, is through the interaction we have with the outside world. And so we then develop this conscious sense of self, or ego, which is but a fraction of the larger self or soul that we are.
well, yeah, I mean, I can see it in my own life that, you know, I may have taken in that experience early on, but I see now that I am recreating that over and over and over again. Like, just in
Mhm.
terms of the experiences I choose to have, or the engagement I choose to have with something. I can see that I'm not necessarily open to the truth, or reality. I'm shaping it.
Yes. Well, there is a way, and the ego's job, the ego is important. There are some traditions that talk about how bad the ego is and we don't need the ego. But from the perspective of analytical psychology, we need the ego because it interfaces with the unconscious, all that's in us, and the conscious world out here. So we need a mediator. And that the ego early on in life forms up in relationship and response to outer world demands, outer world shoulds, must, and ought tos, outer world dictums, expectations. But then in the second half of life, what the ego really has to do is connect with the inside world and what is it the soul wants and what is it the soul values. And then the ego begins to connect and bring that out into the outside world. So the locus of control shifts. It shifts from outside expectations, demands, shoulds, must, and ought to the inside, we might say demands of the soul.
Wow. So this, what we're seeing, this is the interface,
Yes,
basically.
yes,
And so this makes sense with this idea of creative resonance, which I've been exploring, which is as we truly get truthful with an instrument, and that can actually help tune our insides, so we become, so we're expressing on the outside what we're expressing on the inside. When that can become really consonant or the same thing, then there's this resonance. And I see that you're saying that, we're taking it in, and then we're starting to, translate the soul out, in a sense.
right.
And yet, and not, and anything against that, and I feel like there's a filter. I have still internalized that filter, which we talked about many times, the shoulds, musts, or what, or this is going to happen, or whatever, so that I, as much as I may seem that I'm expressive, and I am, especially with a harp in my hand, sometimes I feel like Joshua, in the Battle of Jericho, with a trumpet in his hand, he can do anything, like I can bring the walls down if I've got that trumpet. I can feel comfortable if I'm in music, and yet I am constantly aware of where I am engaging with my own hiding behavior,
Yes.
constantly, unless I'm in the throes of music, in which it's such a relief.
Yeah, no, I'm thinking about how often our art and our profession um, partly arises um, as the conduit through which we feel comfortable sharing the totality of who we are. And that when we aren't in that place, we don't have the muscle, the psychic and emotional muscle to live our truth, that we do hide. And there is sometimes a way in which people's art and profession is what Winnicott called an adaptive self, that it's not the total self, but it's the adaptive self. It's the place we feel safest in interfacing. And like you said, and I'm going back to your musical, The Golden Cage, sometimes the adaptive self becomes the golden cage that one part of us still wants and another part of us wants freedom from. And so it would be easy. And if I had a 1, 2, 3 of how to get there, I always say to my announcements, I'd be on Oprah if I had the 1, 2, 3. But I don't have the 1, 2, 3. But what I know is that happens over time. Every time we pick up this struggle consciously, every time we feel ourselves in the throes of wanting to hide and the push of the soul to express, and every time we can help those two positions move a little closer together, and we can take a step forward together. So the step forward to share with one person, the step forward to share with the group. And little by little, something then shifts these two extremes, the hiding and that prompting, that pushing of the raw sharing somehow blend in a way that we can, the ego and adaptive self has a way to move forward that is safe and that is more authentic than the way we had been moving.
Yeah, as you were speaking, as you were saying, this and this, the prompting
Mhm.
of your soul, which I often talk about impulse, that when we have an impulse to do something, it's because we've been touched by something we don't know. So the speaking of our soul and then our ego self, I think that's what you said, as we
Yeah.
move forward. And I was thinking the thing that needs to not be there is that voice we've developed that we think is the outside world. Like like it's people will often call it the voice of the critic.
Mhm.
And I think it's the personification of everything we're afraid of in on that side of the interface, and which then gets into the inside. So
Right.
we've been infiltrated, and we infiltrate ourselves. So so how can we, like this is.
Well, it is an unconscious process of differentiation, which means it's like gardening and making something grow in our garden. We cannot make what we're talking about happen, but we can tend it by having the kinds of conversations with ourselves that
Mm,
we're talking about having, with having the kind of dialogue with each other, with having the kind of exchange you were having with your therapist.
mm, mm.
So we tend it, we invite that process to happen, but it's a fun process of separating things out, like separating out our value and worth from outside feedback, separating out someone's criticism now to the wipeout we experienced as a child,
Mm.
separating out someone's critical comment from our own self-hatred and criticism.
This is amazing because it's reminding me of, in the Strings of Passion, there's seven
Mhm.
principles, and the fourth principle is the principle of roles, which is when we differentiate. And in music, we differentiate between bass, accompaniment, and melody. And when we do that, when we can differentiate, then these things can play together, or we can leave one out, or but we can't, and until we get that differentiation we can't we can't play a game with somebody because we don't know who's us and who's the other person. We can't really play music together because we're trying to play the whole thing and we don't see that we're walking all over the bass player or something like that. So this differentiation of these roles allows us to engage with others and otherness, even if it's in ourselves. So I'm thinking that I have not yet necessarily learned to differentiate in my brain between the voice of impulse, or the voice of that's coming through me, the egoic, or whatever it's called, the me that loves to craft things and, oh, I'll make something out of that, and then that imaginary personification of all the danger that could be in the outside world. Oddly, I don't seem to have a personification of all the love that could be in the outside world.
Yes, isn't that amazing? We somehow miss that most of the time.
Right,
We end up with the
right.
uh, what Winnicott called persecutory anxieties. We have
Oh, right.
persecutory anxieties, and they're just happy to grab hold and hijack anything that's going on in our life. They kidnap our present moment to make sure we know we're not safe when that's not that's not the truth. But it still can feel like the truth in our body. But what you're saying, I love how you took it to the roles of bass, accompaniment, and melody, because I think there is that kind of fine differentiation when we begin to have that within our own nature. Just like in music, once you differentiate and relate to each role, they can somehow come together in a whole.
Right.
And that is an organic process in music that is invited, intended by the differentiating out and attending to each separate role. The same is true in our psyche.
Well, and it's interesting because I remember when I was first learning in music school at Bach chorales, and I remember seeing the music, and there was a melody line, and then there was just like a bass line, and I remember saying to my teacher, "Where's the music? Like, the music?" And he says, like, "That is the music. You put all the rest in." And what I began to realize later in life was it was the melody and the bass line. So the melody and the bass line were creating the shape, the outline, the silhouette, the shape, the two sides of it. And then what goes in between, there's a lot of choice there.
Yeah.
There's also choice of bass. I mean, the melody is the melody, unless you're improvising. I don't want to get into that, but I'm thinking that how we decide to do that harmony, the harmony in a sense creates the emotional atmosphere to a certain extent. It can. I don't know. I don't want to go too far afield here, but I'm just really interested in wow, can I change the harmony of my internal with
Absolutely. And I love that because what you're talking about is, and if we go back to the example of you're sharing this work that feels like it's just so you, if you begin to have move towards a harmony, well, let me say it a different way. You don't want, I don't think it's healthy to just pull oneself up over one's fears. Because if you just pushed yourself and said, to heck with it, I don't care anymore, I'm just going to do it, but it still had a lot of power, I think that can set up another negative dynamic that I don't want to go off into.
right.
So I think what's important is this prompting of your soul to share this because it is the heart of your music you want to offer to people. And this part of you that's terrified of being wiped out by people's criticism. If you can begin to honor both and find the next step that both can be satisfied with. Again, the next step, maybe this part of you that's terrified can be soothed by the larger self that says, look, we know that so and so is always supportive and encouraging. And any feedback I would get there would only help me feel more affirmed in my truth. So I'm going to take that risk.
Hmm.
And you're still scared, but there's enough mediating of that fear that you can take that next step. So I think that's a piece of it. It's like letting ourselves honor both sides and say, okay, what's the next step that both sides can live with? And that next step becomes the move towards the harmony.
Well, and I also hear you saying you can choose the environment in which you share this. You can actually choose an environment that's safe because the sharing of it is an action that's important. And it's not like this is the better work than other work or any, I mean,
Right.
it's simply something I've hidden. And that may have been, what's giving it its power inside me. And you're right, I could choose. There are certain people I could choose who I know I'm going to be safe with.
There you go. And the other urge that I'm hearing behind this that I think that is so true of our soul is sometimes the need is we just need to be seen.
Yeah, and I mean that's one of the things that I want to create and have created in the academy that I have for harpists is that safe place. The safe place that I was able to find with my teacher Tony Montanaro or in the New Opera and Musical Theater Initiative, the guidelines around it that this would stay and because otherwise if there is no safe place, that stuff is alas for those who never sing and die with all their music in them. And it's not that this music is going to change the world. It's just that it's just being here and not hiding.
Well, it will change you. So it
Uh,
changes your world. And that's
right, and it
powerful.
makes you a more resonant human.
Exactly. And then I believe everyone you come in contact with is changed by that. It's not necessarily in a way we can take a scientific instrument and measure, but it's a way that when I feel you living authentically and saying, here I am, I feel deep inside, wow, I can do that too. This is okay for me to do that. She's doing that. So it does change the world, but it starts most importantly by changing your world, the inside of you.
Well, I see what you're saying, and it's such a different perspective. Like I was thinking, well, this work might change or wouldn't change the world. But what I hear you saying is that when you are not hiding who you are, regardless of what it is that you're sharing about yourself, regardless of what it is that you're not hiding, when you are not hiding, you are making a space for other people to not hide. You're creating a resonance in the world, or you're creating something in the world. So it's not the work itself and whether it's better or worse or whatever, but it is literally the act of not hiding.
Yeah, that is profound. What you just said, really, I think it's so important for all of us to hear and remember that it isn't the work, it isn't what we have offered with music, composition, dance, writing, but it is our resonance, our vibrational field of authenticity. That is what has the power.
And you're saying authenticity, and I've never really known what authenticity is, but I think in light of this conversation, authenticity is being a not hiding person.
Yeah, it's letting the fullness of all you are and your experiencing of yourself flow in appropriate ways.
So you can't actually attempt to be an authentic person. All you can do is like, don't do more, hide less. Again.
Yeah, don't do more, hide less.
So I see that this conversation, as often happens, has come around to something different than I thought it was, or that I said it was, when I gave the title in Facebook, which was the larger self versus the ego self, or the higher self versus the lower self. But let's just say it was about that. Let's just pretend that we did talk about that. And how would you say what we just came to is that?
Yeah, I think it is that, in that when we show up in the moment with all of who we are and we are authentic, the ego self, our little self, or smaller self, I can't remember how you call it, that then is the fullest expression it can possibly be in the moment of our larger self. So that we might imagine the larger self is the base of the pyramid, wanting to flow out through the ego self. And we are authentic when our ego self is expressing, embodying, consciously being with all that it knows of the larger self.
So as you're saying that, and as you said pyramid, I was thinking, so the ego self, or the self that's, in the world, is like this pinpoint at the top of a funnel. Like when you're making
Yeah.
a cake decorating or something, it's like that place that the stuff comes through. And the more that we let that come through that tiny hole of us, our being on the world, that is when we, I don't know how I'm saying this, but like that's when it's not like there's a higher self somewhere and there's a lower self, and but it's almost like when you said it, it's like it's this continuum, almost like the higher self is this, endless cistern of pure water, underneath, and then this is the geyser that either is open or not.
It's a beautiful metaphor. And if we think about the cake, that funnel, there's all this energy in the tube of the icing. And if the top of the funnel is half closed,
Right.
you're not getting the full effect. But if the top of the funnel is completely open, that's authenticity psychically, is when the top of the funnel is open. you know,
So
and
that might seem a little out of control at times.
it might. But it also is, the other thing you said that is important is that there is not a disconnect within us between our ego and the larger self, but the conduit of flow might be blocked. And that's what we consciously tend through spiritual practices and analysis and therapy, 12-step work. any work of consciousness is what we're doing is we are cleaning out that channel and we're making sure the funnel top, the ego, is as open as it can be to that flow coming through.
That's so funny because I'm thinking now as you said that I was like, oh yeah. So when it comes through, it makes these little people, on the cake of life, and we're the little people on the cake of life. I'm just going off on the okay. Get that out of my head. Okay. All right. So I know we don't have that much time. So so I'll put this out and maybe we can't answer it. So why am I afraid to share this thing? Well, it's not an earth-shaking thing. Like if somebody heard it, they wouldn't be like, "Oh my God, how come you never?" It'd just be like, "Oh, why am I afraid?"
Well, I don't know specifically, but I wonder if it's because what you're sharing feels like a raw bit of the larger self that you don't yet have full consciousness of. And so it's kind of like baby skin and it and
Oh.
and so that's why I suspect you're afraid of it. It
I may be afraid of it because I haven't crafted it into something that kind of hides. Because I know I do that. Sometimes I will take an artistic expression and craft it in such a way that it's impressive or, something, but it hides the truth. I think that's why people love that song, The Nightingale. I
yeah,
didn't do that. And so it's really, it didn't feel like actual music to me it just didn't sound like music to me. Uh-oh, you froze. Oh dear. Okay, now you're back.
yeah,
All right. Okay. So it's not necessarily, oh, okay. It's raw. It's just raw.
yeah.
So I can either make the decision to make it not raw, which I don't think I want to do, or I can take a leap of faith and be willing to share it raw.
Yes, and if we go with the metaphor of raw, you're going to expose it to the light of consciousness, other people, slowly, just like the baby skin has to build up to tolerating more sunlight, the metaphor for consciousness. So you honor this is raw, this is how you want to share it. And again, you begin to share it in ways that allow the light of you to get used to the light of consciousness on that place, the light of outside consciousness.
All right. Well, thank you.
You're
So,
welcome.
so I feel like I've gotten so much from this, and the idea of that continuum, the idea of the differentiation, of you sort of my higher self, my lower self, but that's a continuum, and yet there's this critical thing that gets in the way and makes me think those two things are separate.
Right.
And then the idea of what to start, how to start, and then most importantly is that when we're not hiding, it's not so important what we're sharing, but it is being a not hiding person that
Mhm.
makes a difference for ourselves in the world. I think those are the two things. And then also, as I start sharing, understanding to create something safe around it so that the baby isn't put right out into the sunlight and
Yeah.
that it gets little by little.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It gets little by little, so it develops the psychic skin in this case to withstand the light of other people's gaze.
I see. So it's not that I will be hiding it.
Yeah.
It is that I will be getting comfortable bringing it out.
Right. And that is so important that we give ourselves that time and space and compassionate care.
Hmm. And that we find others who are committed to that as well, so that we do
Absolutely.
that together with them,
Yeah.
which is how I feel here. And even though I know we're broadcasting this, when we're together, I just feel that we're together, and that's all that I need to worry about or to think about.
Yes. Yes. I
So
feel that.
is there anything last thing that you want to share, or what that sort of your takeaways from today?
I'm just going to say to myself and you and everybody watching, be courageous and let it flow through that little Let it take that little plastic sliver thing off the funnel and let it go.
Yeah, and that is inspiring to others when we share that. Well, thank you, Kathleen. Thank you so much. It's always just a complete joy to meet with you, and
It's great fun.
I will see you next week then.
All right.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Visit jungatharp.com for show notes, contact links, and to follow the ongoing conversation. That's Jung, as in Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst, and harp, as in the many-stringed instrument.